I had been away on a 3-day business trip, exhausted but relieved that I would finally return to the small sanctuary I had worked years to afford. My little blue siding house with the white shutters on Maple Avenue was the only thing in this world I could call completely mine. As I pulled into the driveway, suitcase rattling in the back seat, I expected silence, maybe the soft hum of the refrigerator through the kitchen window. Instead, my headlights revealed a row of trucks and SUVs lined up like it was some block party I had never been invited to. Loud country rock thudded through the walls, the bass rattling the glass panes I had replaced myself the previous spring. For a split second, I thought I had driven to the wrong house. I stepped out, gripping my purse against my chest. The smell of spilled beer, greasy wings, and cigar smoke slapped me in the face as soon as I opened the gate. My heart was already sprinting dread coiling in my stomach. I walked closer and froze. My living room lights blazed through the curtains. People were inside, laughing, shouting, clinking bottles. My couch, my rug, my grandmother's rocking chair that I had brought in from storage. All of it was being used by people I barely recognized from distant family barbecues. My clothes were piled in trash bags on the porch as if I was some tenant evicted for failing rent. Then the door burst open and there he was. James, my older brother, broad-shouldered beer in one hand, smirk carved across his face like he had rehearsed it for this exact moment. His eyes scanned me up and down, then he raised his voice so that every person behind him would hear. "You don't have space here, you parasite! Leave." His words struck like a fist to my gut. Laughter followed behind him, the kind of laughter that isn't loud but sharp, the kind meant to humiliate. I could not move. My shoes stuck to the porch as if the wood itself wanted me to feel the sting longer. My own brother had just called me a parasite in my own doorway, with my possessions crammed into black plastic bags like garbage. I felt heat shoot up my neck into my cheeks, a burn of shame and rage mixed together. I opened my mouth, but nothing came. Behind James, I spotted my parents, my mother Margaret with her arms crossed, lips pressed thin. My father Richard standing like a judge delivering silent approval. Neither of them stopped him. Neither said a word in my defense. My father's eyes flicked at me once cold and dismissive, then back at James as if to silently affirm that this house, the one deeded in my name, truly belonged to him. I whispered half to myself, half to the heavy night air, "This is my house." But James only stepped forward, lowering his voice into a growl everyone could still hear. "Not anymore. You're just squatting in what should have always been mine." He jabbed a finger toward the driveway. "Take your junk and get out before I really make you leave." The humiliation pressed down harder than the humid summer night. The sting was not only in his insult, but in the silence of everyone else. Cousins I had grown up with looked away sipping their drinks. Neighbors I had waved to for years leaned against my walls, suddenly strangers. The betrayal spread beyond James's smirk. It was my entire bloodline complicit, willing to erase me as if I had never bled and sweated to buy this home. My hands trembled, but I refused to cry. Not here. Not in front of them. My heart pounded with the ache of shock, but beneath that ache something sharper stirred like a blade being drawn from a sheath. I did not yet know how, but I knew this night would not be the end of my claim. They had taken my dignity in public, but they would not take the one thing I had fought for my entire adult life. The insult burned into my skin, the word parasite echoing in my ears, promising me that this battle had only just begun. The music inside kept pulsing, a heavy thump of bass that rattled the window panes I had washed just last week. I stepped off the porch, dragging one of the trash bags to peek inside. My blouses still on hangers crumpled together like discarded laundry. A framed photo of me on college graduation day slipped out. The glass cracked my cap and gown, bent under the weight of beer cans that had been tossed in with my clothes. My throat tightened, but I forced myself to keep scanning. Another bag reeked of spilled soda, my books soaked and warped pages curling like leaves in a fire. They hadn't just packed me out, they had trashed me out. The front yard was littered with red plastic cups, cigarette butts, and chicken wing bones. Someone had spray painted a smiley face on my white fence slat, the paint still wet enough to glisten under the porch light. My flower pots, the geraniums I had planted in spring, lay overturned, roots torn, and soil scattered across the sidewalk. The scent of fresh earth mixed with stale beer and smoke made me nauseous. This wasn't a homecoming, it was an invasion. I pushed the door open, ignoring James's glare. The living room looked like a war zone. The rug my grandmother had woven by hand was stained with salsa. My couch sagged under the weight of 3 men I didn't recognize, their muddy boots pressed against the cushions. The bookshelf I had arranged alphabetically was now tipped novels on the floor, someone using one as a coaster for a sweating glass. My grandmother's rocking chair squeaked under the weight of a woman chewing gum loudly, her heel grinding the wood like it was her own. My father stood by the mantel, beer in hand, laughing at some crude joke James had made. My mother hovered beside him, her face impassive, but her eyes glinting with satisfaction, as if watching me stripped of everything gave her a quiet thrill. They saw me at the doorway, but neither spoke. The silence was heavier than words. It said, "We chose him. We will always choose him." I caught my breath, every detail carving deeper into my chest. The TV blared a football game, James's friends cheering as if they belonged here more than I ever had. The kitchen table was buried in pizza boxes, sauce smeared across the wood. My carefully framed bills and house documents, once pinned neatly on the corkboard, had been ripped down corners, torn, some already stained with grease. I stepped further inside my shoes, sticking to the floor. Someone had spilled beer, and the sticky residue clung to each step, a disgusting parody of roots, like they wanted me trapped in this nightmare. The smell of smoke burned my nostrils. My eyes watered not from tears, but from the heavy haze that clung to the air. I imagined my curtains, now yellowed at the edges, absorbing that stench permanently. In the corner, a cousin I hadn't seen in months whispered something to his wife, both of them staring at me with pity and disdain tangled together. The whisper was just loud enough. James deserves it anyway. She's just a girl. Girls don't hold houses. My stomach clenched so hard it felt like a fist inside me. That wasn't just James's cruelty, it was a family creed spoken aloud, one I had heard in different forms my whole life. I gripped the doorframe so tightly my knuckles whitened. The humiliation wasn't private anymore. It wasn't a spat between siblings. It was a spectacle my downfall turned into entertainment. My possessions reduced to props in James's new performance as master of this house. Every detail screamed that they wanted me erased, that they believed a daughter's name on a deed was a mistake waiting to be corrected. But as I stood there, rage swelled hotter than shame. The insult of Parasite still echoed, but each overturned flower pot, each trashed blouse, each smirk from the faces around me, layered onto something stronger. They had desecrated my sanctuary. Yes, but with each cruel detail I took in, I knew I was cataloging evidence. Evidence of betrayal, evidence of destruction, evidence of a war they thought they had already won. They were wrong. I stood frozen in the doorway, my chest tightening as if an invisible fist had clamped around my ribs. Each laugh, each careless stomp on my floorboards sent a shiver of humiliation crawling up my spine. The word parasite repeated in my head like a cruel drumbeat. Parasite. As though the years of sacrifice, the double shifts, the missed holidays, the ramen dinners to save every penny meant nothing. As though I had leeched off anyone when in truth no one had lifted a finger for me except me. Memories crashed against me in brutal waves. Nights when I walked home after midnight from the diner, my feet blistered but my mind rehearsing numbers, how many tips I needed, how much extra I could squeeze into the mortgage account. The day I signed those papers at the county office, trembling, but proud, knowing my name, Emily Parker, was etched into the deed. No one else's. Not James. Not my parents. Mine. Now here I was being told to leave as if I was squatting in someone else's property. I glanced at my mother. She avoided my eyes, but I saw the faint curl of her lip. My father's jaw was tight, his body angled slightly toward James like a bodyguard ready to defend his heir. I was not their heir. I was the daughter, the expendable one. The weight of that truth pressed harder than the stench of smoke in my lungs. James took a long swig of beer and belched his buddies roaring with laughter. "See? She doesn't even fight back," he said loudly. "Because deep down she knows. She doesn't belong here." The words were bait, but they hooked anyway, tearing through me. My fists clenched at my sides. I wanted to scream, to throw something to shove him out of the doorway he dared to claim. But I held still, my nails digging crescents into my palms. Because if I erupted now, I would look exactly like the out-of-control intruder he painted me to be. From behind me came a whisper, sharp enough to slice. "Well, at least James will keep the house in the family." Daughters always leave. It was my aunt sipping wine on my porch swing, the one I had painted yellow last spring. My knees buckled slightly. They weren't just siding with James out of convenience. They believed I was temporary. They believed my worth was conditional, that the home I had built was only waiting until the rightful man reclaimed it. I felt heat blur my vision, but I refused to let it spill. I would not cry, not in front of them. The humiliation was a fire spreading through my veins, but it carried something else too. Anger, pure, unfiltered anger that shook me awake. They wanted me small, diminished, erased. They wanted my silence to be proof they were right. I scanned the chaos again, but this time my eyes sharpened, catching every careless insult etched into the space. The beer rings on my coffee table, the muddy boots grinding into my rug, the photograph of my grandmother's chair now scuffed and squeaking under someone's weight. These weren't just slights, they were offenses, deliberate marks of disrespect, and I was remembering them, searing each one into my mind. My brother leaned closer, his breath reeking of hops. "Get moving, Emily," he muttered, "before we drag you out." His smirk widened as he saw the fury in my eyes. He thought he had won. He thought humiliation was final. But under that humiliation, my anger solidified into something sharper. Like steel hardening in fire, my resolve was being forged. They wanted me to leave broken. Instead, they had given me the fuel I needed. My humiliation would not be my ending. It would be my evidence, my proof, my weapon. Parasite, he had called me. But parasites drain. I had built. I had earned. I had fought. And I would fight again, not with screams or fists, but with something far stronger. James blocked the doorway as if he were the rightful gatekeeper of everything I had built. His broad frame filled the space, one hand still clutching his half-empty beer bottle, the other gripping the doorframe like he owned the house itself. I lifted my chin, forcing my voice to steady, even though my insides trembled. "This is my house, James. My name is on the deed. You don't get to tell me to leave." My words sliced through the room, but instead of shame, his smirk deepened. He reached behind him and pulled a folder off the kitchen counter. The greasy fingerprints smeared across its cover told me it had already been passed around like gossip. He flipped it open and waved a paper toward my face. "Wrong," he sneered. "Dad and Mom signed everything over to me. They know who deserves to carry the Parker name, who deserves a house like this." He shook the paper, its edges bent and crumpled, but in the dim light I could see something horrifying, a forged signature that looked disturbingly like my own. I lunged for it, but he yanked it back with a laugh. "Easy, Parasite. Don't want to ruin your delicate hands." My stomach churned. Behind him, my mother's voice rang out cold and deliberate. "Emily, you should not make this harder than it needs to be. Your brother is right. A house belongs to a man who will build a family. You'll just end up running off to someone else's household. Better that James secures it." The words landed heavier than any slap. My father's voice followed deep and steady like a gavel pounding. "He is my son. Sons inherit. Daughters leave." He didn't even flinch as he said it, as though it was law carved into stone. Gasps rippled faintly through the crowd, but no one opposed him. Their silence was complicity. I stared at the forged document in James's hand, bile rising in my throat. "That's fake," I said, my voice shaking but clear. "You think I won't prove it?" James leaned closer, his beer breath sour, his eyes gleaming with triumph. "Who's going to believe you, them?" He gestured toward our parents, toward the relatives scattered around my living room like vultures circling a kill. Laughter trickled behind him, quiet but sharp. For a moment, my resolve faltered. The sight of my life, my home being dismantled and reassigned by bloodlines and bias, almost crushed me. But then I remembered the nights of labor, the bills I had paid with shaking hands, the sleepless hours of scrubbing dishes just to meet mortgage deadlines. No one had stood beside me then. And I realized if no one stood with me now, I would stand alone. I straightened, stepping forward until my nose almost brushed James's chest. My voice came out lower, steadier, vibrating with fury I could no longer hide. You may think you've won tonight, but this house is mine. That paper will burn the second anyone who matters looks at it. And when it does, you won't just be a thief, you'll be a criminal. For the first time, his smirk faltered only for a second, but I saw it. The corner of his lip twitched. His eyes flickered with the smallest trace of unease. He masked it quickly with a chuckle, turning to the crowd. Hear that? She's threatening me now. She's lost her mind. My parents' silence sealed their allegiance. They stood firm behind James, their son, their heir, their chosen one. I felt every eye in the room pressing against me, waiting for me to crack, to cry, to flee. But instead, I let the rage inside me sharpen into something cold and focused. They thought this confrontation ended here. They were wrong. This was only the beginning. The forged paper in James's hand was not just a weapon. It was the living proof of a lifetime of favoritism, a lifetime of being told that my worth ended where his began. Standing there surrounded by betrayal, my mind snapped back to the earliest moments that carved this imbalance into stone. I was 8 when I first noticed the difference. James, already a teenager, had crashed my father's truck into a ditch after sneaking out with his friends. Instead of punishment, my father clapped him on the back the next morning at breakfast and said, "Boys will be boys." My mother slid James an extra pancake while I sat silently with my orange juice, knowing if I had so much as spilled milk, I would have been scolded for being careless. That was the rhythm of our household. James stumbled and cushions appeared. I stumbled and the ground hardened. By high school, the pattern was unbearable. My father proudly bought James a second-hand Mustang for his 16th birthday, boasting to neighbors about his son driving a real man's car. Meanwhile, when I asked if I could attend an art program across town, the answer was sharp and final. We're not wasting money on hobbies. You'll marry and have a husband to provide. Let James get the opportunities. He's the one who will carry the family forward. I remember biting the inside of my cheek until it bled, the taste of iron sealing my silence. College was no different. James failed out of his first year at State, and yet my parents paid for him to try again, footing the tuition bill with excuses. He just needs time to find his path, my mother insisted. I, on the other hand, was told there was no money left for me. If I wanted higher education, I had to earn it myself, and I did. I worked double shifts at the diner, poured every tip into a mason jar hidden under my bed, and applied for scholarships late at night with bloodshot eyes. When I finally walked across that graduation stage degree in hand, my parents didn't even attend. They were busy that weekend, driving James to look at yet another car he couldn't afford. Those years of rejection of being second to my brother in every possible way had carved a scar so deep it felt permanent, yet I used that scar as fuel. While James drifted from job to job, burning through handouts, I rose. I climbed through the endless ranks of part-time positions until I landed steady work, then fought tooth and nail to save for a down payment. Every brick of this house, every patch of paint on the wall was a monument to my independence. I had earned it with no one's help, and that was exactly why they resented me for it. Because this house was proof that the family story, the one where James was destined to inherit, where the son was everything and the daughter was nothing, was a lie. My existence, my deed, shattered that illusion. And now, standing in my living room, James waving forged papers like trophies, my parents nodding in approval, I understood. This wasn't just about property. It was about rewriting the narrative they had tried to force on me since childhood. It was about erasing my rebellion against their hierarchy, erasing the evidence that a daughter could achieve without their blessing. The stakes had never been higher. This house was not just walls and furniture. It was my proof of survival, my one claim to dignity in a family that had never offered me any. Losing it to James would not only strip me of shelter, it would erase years of sacrifice. And worse, it would cement their twisted creed that daughters are temporary, sons eternal. That realization did not weaken me. It crystallized me. For the first time in years, I felt the old fire that had driven me through endless nights and unpaid bills. They wanted to bury me under James's shadow again, But they had forgotten one thing: I had built this house out of shadows before, and I would not let them take it. I refused to let James's forged papers be the last word. My pulse still hammered from the confrontation, but beneath that pounding, I felt a cold determination take root. If he wanted to play games with documents, then I would expose him with documents of my own. I slipped out of the house that night under the pretense of dragging another trash bag to my car. No one stopped me. They thought I was retreating, but I wasn't leaving. I was planning. The next morning, before the hangover from James's party had even cleared the air, I returned. I didn't knock. I walked straight through the front door, my head high, and headed to the room James had claimed as his office. Once it had been my guest bedroom, tidy and smelling faintly of lavender. Now it reeked of beer and sweat. Papers were scattered across the desk, sticky rings from bottles staining the corners. I opened the top drawer, my fingers trembling with both fear and fury. At first, I found only receipts from bars, half-written checks, and lottery tickets. But then I spotted a thick manila envelope with my name scrawled on it in sloppy marker. My stomach flipped. Inside were photocopies of property transfer documents. I scanned the pages quickly, my parents' names scribbled in familiar handwriting, James's name typed neatly into the new owner line. My own signature appeared at the bottom, jagged and crude, a forgery so poor I almost laughed if it hadn't made me sick. I snapped photos with my phone, hands shaking so badly the images blurred. I forced myself to breathe, steadying the camera capturing every page. Then I noticed something else, an email printout. James had been careless enough to leave it on top of the folder. It was from his personal Gmail dated just last week, addressed to a friend. Once the transfer clears, the place is mine. She'll have nowhere to go, and Mom and Dad are finally backing me. Should have been mine all along. Drinks on me when it's done. The words seared into me like acid. He wasn't just delusional. He had orchestrated this takeover, bragging about it before it was even complete. My heart raced faster, but I kept snapping photos. This was more than humiliation now. This was fraud. This was a crime. I shoved the papers back into the envelope exactly as I'd found them, careful not to disturb the order. Then I spotted one final piece, a notepad, the kind James always scribbled on when he was too drunk to keep things straight. Across several pages were notes. Need Dad's signature. Get Margaret to pressure Emily. Talk to notary friend owes me. The list was damning, a breadcrumb trail of intent. I photographed every page. My phone buzzed with each shutter click, each vibration feeling like a lifeline. Proof. Finally, I had proof that this wasn't just a family squabble, it was premeditated theft. I slid the notepad back, heart hammering. The noise from the living room grew louder. James's booming laugh rattling the walls. He had no idea that in his arrogance he had already handed me the rope that would hang him. As I slipped the phone into my pocket, I caught sight of myself in the mirror above the desk. My face was pale eyes rimmed red from sleepless nights. But behind that exhaustion, I saw something new. Steel. For years, I had swallowed their favoritism, their insults, their dismissal. But now, I had something they couldn't dismiss: evidence. Evidence that could not only return what was mine, but expose the rot festering in the very foundation of this family. I walked out of the room, slowly steadying my breathing, and for the first time since James had called me a parasite, I smiled. He thought he had written me out of my own story, but I had just found the pages that would rewrite his ending. I left the room with my phone tucked deep into my pocket, every image burned into its memory and into mine. My heart still pounded like a drumline, but it wasn't just fear anymore. It was rhythm. It was purpose. For the first time since James had sneered that I was a parasite, I felt the tide turning. I had what he never expected me to have: proof. I walked past the kitchen where empty bottles clinked as James and my father toasted. My mother leaned in close to him, whispering with a smile I had not seen directed at me in years. The picture was clear. They had crowned their son, their heir, their champion. They thought I would shrink back into the shadows, ashamed and defeated. But as I stepped into the sunlight outside, the shame no longer pressed as heavily. Anger had replaced it, and anger could be sharpened into resolve. I loaded my clothes, still damp from spilled soda, into the trunk of my car. My neighbor's eyes peeked from behind curtains, and for once I didn't care. Let them see. Let them gossip. One day soon they would know the truth. I slammed the trunk shut and gripped the edge of the car, forcing my breath to slow. Every humiliation from last night replayed in my mind, the laughter, the whispers my aunt's words about daughters being temporary. Each one was fuel-stoking a fire I hadn't let myself unleash until now. I drove to the one place I knew I could think without the stink of betrayal, my best friend Claire's small apartment across town. She opened the door in her pajamas, shocked to see me with trash bags slung over my shoulders and tears streaked down my face. But when I pulled out my phone and showed her the photos, her shock turned to fury. "Emily," she said, her voice shaking, "this isn't just wrong. This is criminal." He forged signatures. He bragged about it in writing. Hearing the word criminal from someone else's lips was like a switch flipping inside me. Until that moment, part of me still framed this as a family fight, a cruel but private betrayal. But no, James had committed fraud. My parents had enabled him. This wasn't family business. This was the law. I spent the rest of the night sprawled across Claire's floor, sorting the photos, labeling them, backing them up on a flash drive. My hands trembled less with each copy I made, as if duplicating the evidence multiplied my strength. I remembered the words of my father's sons, "Inherit daughters leave," and realized he had been wrong all along. Daughters fight. Daughters endure. Daughters build. And daughters do not leave quietly. By dawn, exhaustion tugged at my body, but my mind refused to rest. I outlined what I needed: the original deed, my mortgage statements, tax receipts, utility bills, all hard proof that I was the rightful owner. I listed every step James had taken that pointed to intent: the notepad with his scrawled reminders, the email boasting to his friend, the forged papers with sloppy signatures. One by one, I pieced together a chain that no smirk, no toast, no parental bias could erase. When the sun broke through Claire's blinds, I stood and looked at myself in her bathroom mirror. My hair was tangled, my eyes hollow, but beneath it I saw a woman hardening, sharpening, refusing to be erased. James thought he had crushed me into silence. My parents thought their favoritism was law. But I had something stronger than their voices. I had truth. I had evidence, and I had a fire that no dismissal could smother. I whispered to my reflection, steady and unshaking, "You are not a parasite. You are the owner, and you will prove it." 2 days after I uncovered James's forged papers, I walked into the office of Ms. Carter, a real estate attorney with a reputation for tearing apart fraudulent transfers like wolves tear through meat. The lobby smelled faintly of lemon polish and old books, a sharp contrast to the sour stench of beer and betrayal that still clung to my clothes. I handed her the flash drive with the photos, my voice steady even though my palms were slick. "They're trying to steal my house," I said. "And they think because I'm the daughter, no one will care." She plugged in the drive, scrolled through the photos, and raised her eyebrows. "Forgery, conspiracy, fraudulent conveyance," she muttered under her breath. Then she looked up at me. "Emily, this isn't a family dispute anymore. This is a criminal matter. If you want to fight, you have the evidence to win." Her certainty landed in my chest like a hammer hitting an anvil. For the first time, I felt the weight of authority on my side. We spent hours assembling the arsenal. She asked for my original deed, and I pulled the crisp document from my folder, my name clear in bold ink. She asked for mortgage statements, tax receipts, utility bills, everything that showed years of payment, every sacrifice etched into numbers and dates. I spread them across her desk, a mosaic of my labor. "This is proof of ownership," she said firmly. "No biased parent, no arrogant brother can erase what's here." Then she pointed at the email James had printed. "This," she said, tapping the screen, "is intent. He bragged about the crime before it was even done. That's arrogance, but it's also your leverage." I watched her highlight the text, her pen strokes decisive. For once, someone was fighting for me, not against me. By the end of the meeting, she had drafted an emergency motion to the county court requesting an injunction against any transfer of the property. "This will freeze everything," she explained. "No one can sell, no one can transfer, no one can evict you legally while this is pending. We'll make sure James can't pretend to be the rightful owner another day." My chest loosened for the first time in weeks. James had thrown me out with arrogance, waving papers he thought would silence me. But soon, those very papers would be dissected line by line, signature by signature, until the truth was undeniable. Leaving her office, I felt the summer air strike my face with new sharpness. I drove straight to the bank where I met with a manager I knew from years of depositing my meager savings. I requested that any account linked to mortgage payments or property taxes be flagged, secured, and frozen against unauthorized access. The manager sympathetic nodded and filed the paperwork. I walked out clutching the stamped confirmation like it was a shield. That night at Claire's, I spread everything across her coffee table. Evidence photos, the injunction paperwork, my deed, my receipts, my tax filings. It looked less like a pile of household clutter and more like ammunition. Every page was a bullet. Every receipt was a blade. James had mocked me for not fighting back, but he had never seen me prepared for war. As the clock ticked toward midnight, I stared at the growing file and whispered to myself, "This is how you win." Not by screaming at the door, not by begging parents who never valued you. You win with proof. You win with law. You win with patience sharpened into justice. For the first time since that night on the porch, I felt something powerful surge through me. Not just anger, not just pain, but the unshakable knowledge that I was no longer playing defense. I was on the attack, and James had no idea what was coming. The court moved faster than I expected. Within a week, the emergency injunction was granted, freezing all transactions tied to my house. The judge's stamped order felt heavier than any set of keys I had ever held. It was more than paper, it was armor. Ms. Carter, precise as ever, told me, "We serve this in person. You need to see his face when the law knocks louder than he ever did." On Friday evening, we drove to Maple Avenue. My stomach churned as the familiar outline of my house came into view. It no longer looked like home. The shutters sagged, the porch was cluttered with beer cans, and music, once again, thudded from inside. James's truck sat crooked in the driveway as though he owned not just the property but the ground beneath it. Two uniformed officers stepped out of their patrol car ahead of us, their presence towering undeniable. James had thrown me out with his friends cheering. Tonight he would face witnesses he couldn't intimidate. I gripped the injunction paperwork as we walked up the porch. The door swung open before we could knock. James stood there holding yet another beer, his eyes narrowing the moment he saw me. "Well, well," he sneered. The parasite crawled back. "Didn't I tell you to stay gone?" His voice dripped with mockery, but there was a flicker of unease when he noticed the officers behind me. Ms. Carter stepped forward, her voice sharp and professional. "Mr. Parker, this is a court-ordered injunction. Effective immediately, you are prohibited from claiming, transferring, or occupying this property as the legal owner. Your actions have been documented as fraudulent." She handed him the papers with the same calm authority one uses to swat a fly. James laughed too loudly, his bravado forced. "This is my house. My parents signed it over. You think a stack of papers will change that?" One of the officers moved closer, his tone firm. "Sir, the deed is in your sister's name. Any attempt to interfere with her property rights is unlawful. You are being warned now, any further trespass or falsification will lead to arrest." The color drained slightly from James's face. He glanced over his shoulder, looking for support. My parents emerged from the living room, confusion flashing across their faces. My father's jaw tightened. "This is ridiculous," he snapped. "My son deserves this house. A daughter cannot hold a family estate." The officer didn't flinch. "With respect, sir, the law doesn't care about family traditions. Ownership is clear." For the first time, the weight shifted. It wasn't my voice against theirs anymore. It was the law against their lies. James's smirk faltered. He crumpled the injunction papers in his fist, but his eyes darted nervously between the officers and Ms. Carter. The swagger that had once fueled him in front of relatives now looked pitiful, a mask slipping under pressure. I stepped forward, my voice steady sharp with months of swallowed fury. "This house is mine! You forged papers, you trashed my belongings, you tried to erase me. But now the truth is here in black and white, stamped by a judge. You don't get to bully me out anymore." The living room filled with his drinking buddies had gone silent. Eyes flicked between us, watching the drama unfold. James's face flushed crimson. "You'll regret this," he hissed, but the threat sounded hollow. "No," I said. My chin lifted, my words cutting through the silence. "You will." The officers remained documenting the scene, ensuring James couldn't twist this into another one of his games. As they took photos of the mess of my belongings still stuffed into trash bags, I felt the tide surge fully in my favor. James had mocked me as weak as temporary, but standing there protected by the law and armed with truth, I was no longer the sister he could shove aside. This wasn't the end of the fight, but it was the first blow landed squarely against him. The injunction was only the beginning. The true reckoning came the following Sunday when James tried to save face by hosting another family gathering at the house as if a party could drown out the sound of a court order. But this time I didn't come alone. Ms. Carter was by my side, armed with copies of every forged paper and the judge's signature. The officers returned too ready to enforce the order if James dared to resist. When we walked through the front gate, the crowd of relatives hushed. They had gathered, expecting James's victory lap, expecting me to remain the disgraced sister who had been thrown out like garbage. Instead, they saw me walk tall with the law flanking my every step. My pulse raced, but my chin stayed high. James barreled forward, his face red and slick with sweat. "She doesn't belong here," he shouted, his voice cracking under the weight of panic. He waved his arms toward me like I was a trespasser crashing his stage. "She's lying. This house is mine. Everyone knows it." Ms. Carter didn't raise her voice. She didn't need to. She unrolled the paperwork and read aloud, her tone crisp and commanding. "The Superior Court of Madison County hereby recognizes Emily Parker as the sole legal owner of the property located at 4 to 12 Maple Avenue. Any claim otherwise, including falsified transfer documents submitted by James Parker, is declared fraudulent. Any attempt to occupy or claim the house without Emily Parker's consent will result in immediate legal consequences." The words echoed off the walls. Murmurs spread like wildfire. I watched cousins exchange wide-eyed glances, uncles shift uncomfortably in their seats. The smug expressions that had mocked me days ago were gone, replaced with shame and confusion. My father's face darkened, his jaw twitching. "This is a disgrace," he muttered. "Sons inherit. That's how it's always been. The court doesn't understand family." His voice rose desperate, as though tradition could erase ink on paper. But the officer standing beside him stepped forward. "Sir, tradition does not override the law. Continued disruption will have consequences." My mother tried to intervene, her voice trembling with false authority. "Emily is too emotional to manage a household. She'll lose it just like women always do. James is the rightful head." But even as she spoke, her words crumbled in the silence of the room. No one nodded. No one clapped. They only stared at the forged signatures now being passed from hand to hand, evidence of deceit laid bare for everyone to see. And then the final blow landed. One officer lifted the notepad I had photographed, reading James's drunken scribbles aloud. "Need Dad's signature. Get Margaret to pressure Emily. Talk to notary friend owes me." The words hung in the air like poison smoke. Gasps erupted. My aunt covered her mouth. A cousin whispered, "He planned it. He really planned it." James lunged, trying to snatch the notepad back, but the officer blocked him. "Enough," the officer barked. "This is evidence. You'll explain it to the judge." For the first time, James's bravado collapsed. His shoulders slumped. His eyes darted wildly as though searching for an escape. The humiliation I had endured on that porch was being returned, multiplied in front of every face that had turned against me. The same cousins who once laughed were now whispering my name with something close to respect. The same relatives who muttered that daughters were temporary now watched as the law stamped permanence onto mine. I didn't shout. I didn't gloat. I stood still, steady, letting the silence stretch while James squirmed. Justice didn't need my screams. It had spoken through documents, through officers, through the undeniable weight of truth. For the first time in my life, the crowd wasn't laughing at me. They were staring at him, the favored son, the chosen heir, reduced to nothing but a criminal in waiting. When the officers left and the crowd dispersed, the house fell eerily silent. The laughter, the jeers, the clinking of beer bottles, all of it evaporated, leaving behind the wreckage of what James and my parents had tried to claim. For the first time in weeks, I crossed the threshold without being shoved back, and the weight of ownership settled into my bones again. This was mine. It had always been mine. Now I would reclaim it not just on paper, but in every corner, every wall, every breath. The living room looked like a battlefield. The rug was stained with dried salsa, the coffee table bore sticky rings, and my grandmother's rocking chair groaned with every movement, its wood scarred from careless heels. I crouched down, running my fingers across the floorboards, the same ones I had sanded and varnished late into the night 2 summers ago. Tears stung my eyes, but not from weakness. They came from resolve. I had fixed this house before. I would do it again. I hired cleaners, contractors, and locksmiths. The locks were the first to go, each click of the drill erasing the violation of James's keys. New brass gleamed in the door frames, a small but powerful declaration. This house bows to me alone. Cameras followed mounted discreetly on the porch and inside the hallway. For too long, my family had treated my life as something they could invade at will. Now every corner would watch record and remember. As the weeks passed, the repairs became a ritual of healing. I scrubbed walls until the smell of smoke faded. I patched holes left by careless fists. I repainted the fence, burying the mocking spray paint under coats of fresh white. When the geraniums bloomed again in their pots, I smiled at their stubbornness. They had been ripped out, tossed aside, yet here they were alive again just like me. But it wasn't only about fixing the damage. It was about restoring meaning. On a Saturday morning, I invited my younger cousin's children, still too innocent to understand the poison of favoritism, into the backyard. We planted seeds together, their little hands pressing soil around roots. One asked why Uncle James wasn't around. I chose my words carefully, because when someone tries to take what isn't theirs, there are consequences. And when someone tells you that you don't belong just because you're a girl, you remember this. What matters is proof of your work. Proof of your strength. Don't ever let anyone erase that. Their wide eyes watched me with quiet awe. For the first time, I felt like the story wasn't just about reclaiming my house. It was about planting something new. Boundaries, values lessons that might outlast me. At night, when the repairs were done and the house smelled faintly of lavender again, I would walk from room to room, touching the walls like greeting old friends. Each space whispered of the battles fought here. The humiliation on the porch, the evidence uncovered in the office, the reckoning in front of family who had dismissed me all my life, and now the calm after the storm. One evening, I sat in the rocking chair, its wood newly polished, and let the silence envelop me. For so long, silence had meant erasure. Now it meant peace. I thought of my father's words, "Sons inherit, daughters leave," and for the first time, I didn't feel the sting. I felt defiance. The law had shattered that creed, and my resilience had buried it. The house was no longer just shelter. It was proof that daughters could build, defend, and prevail. And as I closed my eyes, rocking slowly, I realized I had not just restored a home. I had restored myself. The trial that followed was not long, but it was brutal in its clarity. James sat at the defense table, shifting in his chair, his smugness stripped away. The forged documents were entered into evidence, his sloppy handwriting on the notepad displayed on a projector for everyone to see. The email he had sent bragging about stealing my house was read aloud by the prosecutor, his own words condemning him. My parents sat behind him, their faces tight with anger, not at his crime, but at the fact that the law dared to correct their chosen heir. The judge's voice was calm but firm when the verdict was read. Guilty of forgery, guilty of attempted fraudulent transfer, guilty of unlawful eviction. James was sentenced to 2 years of probation, 100 hours of community service, and ordered to pay restitution for the damage done to my home. To him, it was humiliation worse than jail manual labor, public shame, and a criminal record that no amount of charm could wash away. But the consequences didn't stop with him. My father's reputation in town, once built on his image as a respected businessman, crumbled as neighbors whispered about how he had sided with fraud over fairness. My mother, who had always boasted about her family's honor, now found herself isolated at church potlucks, women avoiding her gaze, their voices dropping whenever she entered the room. The community had seen the truth, and they judged it for what it was, not tradition, but corruption. For me, justice was not only in the courtroom, but in the quiet aftermath. I stood outside the courthouse, the autumn wind crisp against my cheeks, and felt lighter than I had in years. I thought back to the night James had spat the word parasite in my face, the humiliation of being shoved out of my own doorway. Now I understood what that word really meant. A parasite feeds on others. James had drained our parents' wallets their attention and even tried to drain my life's work. But I was never the parasite. I was the builder. I had fed myself, sustained myself, and built a future brick by brick. Back at my house, I hung the court order in a frame near the front door. Not as a trophy of bitterness, but as a reminder. Whenever I passed it, I wanted to remember what it took to stand up to gather proof to refuse silence. I wanted every visitor to know this house was defended, this house was earned. In the evenings, I sometimes caught myself replaying my father's words. Sons inherit. Daughters leave. Only now, instead of pain, those words filled me with a strange strength. I was the daughter who had not left. I was the daughter who had stayed, who had fought, who had claimed what was hers and proved that bloodlines and bias had no authority over the law. To the children in my family, the girls especially, I became something unexpected, a symbol. They would ask me about the house, about the trial, about why Uncle James had to pick up trash on the highway for community service. And I would tell them the truth, that strength comes not from being chosen, but from choosing yourself. Now, as I sit on my porch in the quiet evenings, the geraniums blooming at my feet and the new locks gleaming on my doors, I know this battle has changed me forever. I am not the parasite my brother tried to name me. I am the owner, the fighter, the survivor. And to you watching, I'll ask the same question. I ask every time I share my story. Where are you watching from and what time is it right now? Drop your city and hour below. I want to know where you are because your story matters too.